from the Lasser cast, and welcome back to our discussion of season 2 of Yellowjackets. I am with my good friend, Dr. Zayas God, Danny Torkel, who happens to be wearing a shirt for the next video we'll be making today, which is on the movie Darkman. If you guys like horror, and I'm hoping you do because you're on the Lassercast channel, we are actually covering a Road to Evil Dead Rise, which is coming out this month. And Darkman, a Sam Raimi movie, is our next thing we're going to cover. Danny, are you excited to talk about Yellowjackets today?
I am, and I just want to show off. I just got my new Fangoria in the mail yesterday, and it's Evil Dead Rise. But then if you look very closely, they also cover Yellowjackets. So
Worlds collide.
So we even talked a little bit last week when we did our recap of season 1 about, how much do they lean into the horror in Yellowjackets. I think we're going to talk a lot about that today. And I mean, they're talking about Yellowjackets in Fangoria. So that kind of gives away that, while this show has some other, very dramatic, there's espionage plots, there's romance, there's all these other genres in there. I think that kind of horror might be at the center of it.
Yes. Very good point. Take that, author of the Huffington Post article.
Yeah.
So anyway, we are covering 2 episodes. We're covering episode 1 and episode 2 of season 2. And Danny and I are going to do it just the way that Sherry and I used to do it last season, where we pretty much focus on one character at a time and just kind of go through their storyline. So, we might be talking about Shauna in episode 1, then we'll carry on to Shauna in episode 2. Once next week comes along, we'll start recording on Saturdays, and we will just cover one specific episode each time. So, Danny, I was going to ask you right off the bat, when you go to watch a show, like on a streaming service, do you look at the title of the episode before you watch it?
It sometimes, yeah. Which was it? I think it might have been episode 10 of season 1, because I was binging them so fast. I believe that had a Latin phrase.
It does, yes.
That I actually Googled. I took high school Latin, believe it or not, and I was really good at it, and I still remember some of the words. So I was like, oh, is this what I think it means? And then it ended up being like a variation of what I thought it meant.
Yeah.
So that I remember looking up, but I didn't remember the titles of these 2 episodes, no.
Okay.
I was just so excited to watch them.
Right. Well, I kind of have this habit. I like to look at the titles before I watch them. And for episode 1 of season 2, the title is Friends, Romans, Countrymen. So I read that title and I turn to Sherry and I say, okay, someone's going to lose an ear this episode. And I happen to be right. Now, that's part of the Shauna storyline that has Jackie's kind of ghost in it, too. I actually want to say that one for last because that's the one I'm the most excited about.
Yeah.
When Sherry and I would cover these, we'd kind of do our least excited to our most excited characters. And what's weird about this show is that I often am not interested in Thaisa in the past, but then Thaisa in the present day I'm very interested in, right? But I think for season 2, and Danny, I might be wrong, I feel like Misty has the least exciting arc so far. Do you agree or no?
I think of our core 4, so far 2 episodes in, that she is just kind of a periphery character for now. Right. But I also think that story is going to greatly expand thanks to Elijah Wood and that character.
Yeah.
I thought that was such a cute little interesting scene, how he wheels like what appears to be his grandmother into the nursing home that she works at. Right. And they're like making eye contact with each other, even though they don't know each other, kind of setting the stages. That was in episode 2. But yeah, her, in episode 1, she's kind of like on the hunt for Nat. So she doesn't really have anything to do yet.
Yeah.
I do kind of feel like she is going to get involved in the rescuing Shauna from what should be a fairly obvious, what looks like to be a very obvious, I'm pretty sure this woman murdered this guy situation.
Right.
Like even one of the cops like makes that reference. Like, so we're gonna go pick her up, right? He's like, well, no, not yet. Let's see. So I feel like Misty is going to have a lot more to do later on. But I feel like of the core four, she's the one with the least intriguing storyline through 2 episodes of season 2.
Right, and I agree wholeheartedly. You brought up a little point. Sometimes I love talking to you, man, because sometimes you like trigger other thoughts I never even thought of. And I'm thinking about Elijah Wood. I'm thinking about Christina Ricci. And when I watched the episodes, I was saying to Sherry, I was like, oh, isn't it interesting that they're both like early childhood stars? Like both Elijah Wood and Christina Ricci were big stars like right away when they were little kids.
It feels like their paths should have crossed years ago.
Right.
Like you have to assume Elijah Wood auditioned for Casper, or
right.
Or Christina Ricci auditioned for something that Elijah Wood was starring in, and their paths, like you said, they were both child stars at like the early 90s, and then their paths kind of diverted, and they both became like pretty gigantic stars. And they've both made their ways now as adults into, they've remained kind of faithful to horror. Elijah Wood especially, like he's such a great listen. If you ever listen to any podcast that he's on, he's worked with Shudder on a podcast series that they have up on Shudder that you can go into and watch. He's been a guest on the Kingcast several times, and he is just such a cool voice in horror. He's not somebody who you would think, like when you think of like, oh, who are some of like the coolest people to think about and talk about in horror? Oh, Elijah Wood. Elijah Wood did an absolutely amazing remake of William Lustig's Maniac a couple years ago.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, and he was awesome in that movie. It's a fantastic remake. So I'm so excited for Elijah Wood to be joining the show, and like him and Christina Ricci together feels very perfect in a way.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the point that I started thinking of when you were talking before. It's that for all the returned characters, they all kind of have a significant other, right? Like Shauna has Jeff, and I understand that Nat is not with Travis, but like obviously she's had this like ongoing romance or love for Travis for years, right? Then you have Thaisa and her wife, and Misty's always been this sort of one that doesn't have a significant other. She's been this oddball who is always trying to make a connection with someone, always wants to be with people, and always is just kind of the odd duck out, right? And so maybe this time around with Elijah Wood's character, who seems to be in the same kind of group that she's in where they try to solve mysteries and they're always looking into things, like maybe that's going to be her connection, her partner. I didn't even think about that till our conversation.
Or maybe she's going to kill him with a laced fentanyl cigarette. We don't know. It is Misty.
Could go either way, and we do have 5 seasons of this show, so who knows who's going to make it out. But for Misty, really there's not much more to say. That she's right now in the process of just making sure that all the loose ends are tied and that things can't be connected back to Shauna. And now we have Elijah Wood basically saying like, hey, there's something going on with this Adam guy. I think we need to look into this. And so we're going to see what happens with them moving forward. But for me, if I'm going to put these all in order of I'm the most interested in to the least interested in, I would go Misty. Then I would go Nat. Then I would go.
We're dead on. I think Nat, but I don't think again. I don't want to frame it in like least interesting. It's just that I feel like there's what's going on with Thaisa is so crazy right now. I'm so like that to me is you could do a spin-off. Like there could be a 100-minute movie of Thaisa's story as an adult, and it would be one of the scariest horror movies I've ever seen.
Right.
And as far as Shauna goes, I think Shauna is like the kind of the heart of the show. And Shauna is really the character that I'm much more into 1996.
Mm-hmm.
The other three characters I'm much more into as adults. Does
That's
that
that's a good way of
so
putting that. I agree. Yeah.
so like I'm not necessarily intrigued in this whole Adam murder mystery thing that we're gonna get with adult Shauna, even though I love Melanie Linsky,
Right.
but the whole like Shauna talks to her dead friend in a shed, that is all. Again, you can make that. Like, did you remember the movie Alive that came out in the early '90s about the I think it was the rugby team or the that crashed?
Right. That's the
Like,
inspiration for this show.
yeah,
Yeah.
like this show is basically like, what if that was a horror movie?
Right. Right.
And also, you know, there were things in the woods,
Yeah.
right? And I just love like the dilemma that Shauna as a teenager is going through.
Yeah.
And that is so intriguing. So yeah, like if we're ranking them, like who's the most intriguing, who do I most want to talk about? I want to talk about Shauna in 1996. I want to talk about Taissa now in 2021. And then yeah, like I like Juliette Lewis's character is she's like we said this last week doing the recap. Like there's something off. There's something basically psychotic to potentially evil, either about these other three or in these other 3.
Mm-hmm.
And Nat just feels like a victim, where she's a victim of circumstance. She's a victim of true love, and that she's made terrible decisions in her life, but not because she's an awful human being or that there's some evil force, but that she can't win at you know, other than high school soccer, you know, she can't win.
Right.
And I feel like I do love her scene though at the cult, because it brings Lottie into it, which is she's super intriguing.
Right. So that's a great kind of transition right there, right? Because Lottie is not one of the main 4 characters, but it seems like in season 2, maybe we have now a 5th main character. And Lottie and Nat are so interconnected for this season so far. It's kind of like the way that Misty and Nat were connected last season.
And maybe because it's Yellowjackets, we can call them the Hive 5.
Oh God. Oh man, dude, it's too early for that shit. Okay, but
you should hear my students at like 8:30 in the morning complaining about my dad jokes. So yeah.
Well, what I was gonna say though was that Nat. Okay, so she gets kidnapped at the end of last season, and there's the idea that Lottie is back. They mention Lottie's name on the phone right before she gets kidnapped. In this season, we see that that Lottie was one of the people that made it home on a plane or whatever. And they do a little montage in the beginning of episode 1 showing her transitioning back. They show that her parents feel like there's something very wrong with her, and they do electroshock therapy, which that's always very disturbing to me. You know, a little disclosure here, but like this might be weird for YouTube show, but my dad electroshock therapy done to him. So like whenever I see it in a movie, it really bothers me a lot. And she had that done to her, and then like the very last shot before the credits in season 2 episode 1 is like her screaming at like reporters, and it just seems very unhinged, and it's very like, oh my God, what has happened?
There's also that scene that when we were recapping season 1, there's that scene, the flashback to when she's a kid and her parents are arguing in the car, and she like starts screaming in the car, and it distracts her parents from going through a green light, and her parents are like, what the fuck's going on? And then there's this massive car accident where had her parents gone through the green light, they would have been killed. So we know that there is something about her, whether it's some type of mind powers or, you know, something supernatural to an extent that was in existence before she ever landed in, you know, the woods in North Canada, wherever they are in these woods, you know. So she's a character that, it goes back to that idea that we talked about in our recap of a lot of these girls are kind of, there's something wrong with them before anything happens.
Right.
Like Thaisa breaks the girl's leg on the soccer field before she ever has a chance to, sleepwalk and eat dirt and haunt her child on a tree branch. So there is something off about these characters before anything happens. And Lottie's like probably the best example because hers is something that is either something to do with her mind or she sees the future. She's telepathic. I don't know. There's something going on with her.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought up that car part with her parents because I completely forgot about that in season 1. It makes me think that, we mentioned last week that Ashley Lyle, one of the show's creators, the main force behind the show, she was inspired by the idea that they were going to make an all-female version of Lord of the Flies. Now, in Lord of the Flies, you have 2 separate groups. I can't remember the main guy, the main kid, but you have the main kid, and then he's with Piggy and stuff, and they're the minority. And then you have like the sort of the barbaric boys who do kind of crazy things, and they're the majority. And I feel like maybe on this show, you might eventually have sort of like a majority and a minority. And I think Misty would obviously be on one side. And the show makes you kind of think that what's her face? Nat is going to be on the good side. So Misty and Nat are kind of like on opposite sides. I feel like Shauna's in the middle, and then Thaisa might end up being sort of like the dark one or whatever on one side, and then Lottie might be on the other. Like, I think that our natural inclination is to think cults bad. I mean, you always talk about how like cults scare you. You're intrigued by cults, and just in general, when we watch things, religion always kind of seems to be evil in a lot of the things that we watch. So like you think Lottie's evil, but maybe she's actually like a force for good there. And the person that's evil that takes over is Thaisa. Do you give any kind of credibility to that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I can see that. I also think that I think that Lottie is going to be the thing that kind of, I think we're starting to see hints of Lottie's power, whatever it is, draws people to her.
Yeah.
And it also draws people away from her. So I think Thaisa is drawn away from it, like you're a freaking weirdo. But Van is drawn to Lottie.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to be something that like works to break up Thaisa and Van back in 96 is Van is going to be more willing to follow Lottie and her side of the whatever this divide that we're assuming is going to happen.
Yeah. And with Lottie, if we're just going to continue our Lottie discussion, since she's made it back home, she has become successful. She has this sort of following. Nat keeps referring to it as a cult, but it does seem like a sort of, a retreat that people go on or something that people pay for. And everyone seems very positive. It sort of seems like her beliefs that she has back in 1996, just without any kind of creepy wooded stuff, except for one thing. And this is what we get at the end of episode 1 of season 2, is that they're doing this ritual at the end of the episode where they're like burying a naked man in the dirt. And you're like, what the fuck is going on here?
And I like that, like, Nat brings that up and Lottie's like, yes, that's one of the services that we provide. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of, did you ever see The Howling? Joe Dante's The Howling?
I have not, man. I'm sorry.
So in that movie, they like send Dee Wallace and her husband to this like commune.
Yeah,
and it turns out that it's like a werewolf commune.
Oh, that's hot.
And this kind of reminded me of that, but it also reminded me of especially that scene, the scene with the burying of the guy in the dirt, reminded me of this movie Kill List. You would love it. It's this British folk horror movie about these like assassins, this like retired assassin, and he has to like go out for one more job, and it ends up taking him into this like wooded cult in England, and there's parts of the movie that are very reminiscent of The Wicker Man, and they're doing all these weird rituals around fire and everything. It's really freaking good. But yeah, so that scene reminded me of some of that. But yeah.
Well, and there's one thing that I got reminded of too. I wanted to bring up because this ties into episode 2 as well. There's another show that I believe that you haven't watched that was a big hit on our Anchor Pete channel, which was called Search Party. And you haven't seen that, right?
No.
Okay, so Search Party was this weird show that every season, even though it's the main characters and it's the same storyline, every season felt dramatically different. Like one season was like a courtroom drama. One season was like a thriller of trying to get rid of evidence. Another season was a fucking zombie apocalypse. That was the last season, right? Very random and weird. But by that last season where they have a zombie apocalypse, they have a cult. The main character is running a cult. And the weird thing about that is that the cult is broken up into colors. And that's just like Lottie's cult in this, where there was like a bright purple color for one of the groups. And I was like, are they inspired by Search Party? And I could see that because I feel like Yellowjackets and Search Party have a little bit of the same DNA. Like female main characters are a big part in both stories. There's the idea of like a charismatic female leader in both stories. And then one other piece of connecting DNA, which we will get to in episode 2, when we start talking about Shauna, is there's this guy, John Reynolds. Do you know that actor?
No.
He's the guy that we see in season 2 that starts episode 2 that starts talking to Shauna's daughter. And we find out he's a detective. That guy, he's on Stranger Things too. He's one of the cops on Stranger Things that's incompetent.
Okay, he looked familiar. Okay.
He usually wears glasses. On Search Party, he wears glasses, and Natty wears glasses. In this, he's got this sort of porn stash. But I love John Reynolds. He's so good. He's Drew on Search Party. But it's just kind of cool to see this sort of overlap between the two. And I could see Ashley Lyle being inspired by Search Party. But what I was going to ask you was, do you want to talk about Travis's death now, since we're talking about Lottie and Nat?
I mean, yeah. I thought the way that broke down, that was there was a moment there that was like really scary. Like the idea of, so basically Lottie goes to Travis right before Misty and Nat get to him. And this is another thing where, in 1996, Lottie has, her powers or whatever she has, it draws people to her. And one of those people is Travis. And that bothers Nat greatly because you could tell Nat does not like Lottie, doesn't believe any of Lottie's mystical nonsense or whatever, or powers. But she tells Travis, first of all, that Javi is still alive. So Javi is this like MacGuffin at this point. He just, it was during the, when everybody was on drugs, after they had the party.
Yeah.
And everybody was on drugs, and like half the girls became basically murderous cannibals that were ready to murder Travis.
Right.
And I think it was Shauna who saw Javi hiding and just went like, run.
Right.
And he hasn't been seen since. That was like episode 8. So he's been gone. And months have gone by on the show. Like they allude to Shauna being 7 months pregnant now.
Right.
So there's like 6.5 months have passed. Like
it's 2 months since the season finale.
Oh,
they were there for months already.
Okay, well, because I'm remembering Shauna just finding out that she was pregnant, and now she's 7 months pregnant. I didn't realize it was 5 months pregnant at the end. Okay, so she's 7 months pregnant. Months have gone by, and they're covered in snow everywhere. There's really nowhere for Javi to be hiding other than, dead. And, Nat is trying to really to kind of help Travis move on.
Right.
And again, this is where, this is where like Nat does something in this episode, in episode 2, where we could debate forever whether it was the right thing to do. But what I don't think you can argue are her intentions are good.
Agreed.
And I think that's what separates Nat from the other 3 core 4 is that she, even though bad things happen and she does terrible things, I think that good intentions are behind the things that she does.
I think you're right. I think that's a very good point.
And so like she cuts herself, she goes into Javi's bag and she takes a pair of his clothes, covers them in blood, and tells Travis, I found these.
Yeah. And
he like melts down about it, of course, because it's like confirmation. But then Lottie is instantly like, oh no, he's still alive. What do you and Nat's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Shut the fuck up. Yeah.
Which of course is like, again, it's that MacGuffin. Is Javi just gonna show up one day?
Oh, absolutely.
We talked last week, we both kind of thought, is Adam Martin Javier? Is that, but so Travis and Lottie have a relationship, not a physical one, just like because he is able to she's able to calm him down with whatever powers she has.
Yeah.
And it leads to him basically needing to hang himself so that he could, I guess, be close enough to death to get a vision of something, maybe of Javi. And she goes along with it on the idea that she's going to, use this remote control on the crane to lower him so that he doesn't die.
Yeah.
The remote control doesn't work, which I think Nat does a great job of being like, so you're telling me he died because the fucking button didn't work?
Right.
But then there's this jump cut where he's literally a foot off the ground. And she could run to him and hold him.
Right.
And so you're kind of sitting okay, stop playing with the fucking button. And then you're kind of thinking, oh, she's going to now she's just going to haha, I'm the villain. But then it's not that. It's a if there's A and B, there's a C. And the C is she's fiddling with the button, trying to get it to work, trying to save him. And then she looks up and he's 20 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
And she freaks out and runs off. And
well, her vision that she sees, that is kind of like a horror movie, is she sees her religious friend. I always forget her, Laura Lee.
Laura Lee.
She sees Laura Lee walk in.
Yeah.
And Laura Lee's sort of looking like she did before she died, but then she looks sort of like a CGI horror ghost monster. Yeah. But I really like the fact that you brought the point of, you think she's going to be this villain, and it's oh, I tricked you, I got you, but it's not. And then her illness or her power is what distracts her, and he just dies. Sherry was kind of upset because she was like, why doesn't she just go over there and just grab his legs, but this shows why. And I one thing that you didn't mention, though, that I wanted to focus on was that Travis says, I think that if I'm unconscious, then I can see it. I can talk to it. He specifically says it. And it's okay, he's talking about some kind of force. Now, I said in our last review that I always land on the skeptical side for this show. I always feel like there's an explanation for everything that happens, that you could explain it in a real world setting. But after episode 2 of this season, I'm like, oh, okay, there's something supernatural. When we talk about Shauna, I'm going to explain exactly what it is. But to me, when he says it really sounds like maybe there is a force. Maybe it's connected to the guy without eyes that Taissa sees. Maybe that force made them take the plane to fly over Canada and crash. I was not leaning that way initially with the show, but this season is making me lean more that way. And then one last thing too is Juliette Lewis, like you said, is just perfect in her delivery of so the buttons were broken. And it's she's the stand-in for the audience. because it's like they're giving us an answer to one of the questions that we've been dying to hear. How did Travis die? And it's like, he wanted to kill him or make himself suffocate, and then they couldn't get him down because these buttons, you know?
Yeah, but it also answers the question, like, there was did he commit suicide, or was he murdered?
Right.
And again, it's kind of like option C.
Right.
He does put himself in that situation, but he's also not. If we're to believe what Lottie saw, he's not murdered by a human the way that Adam is murdered by Shauna. There's some other thing that finished the job, so to say.
Yes.
And, maybe there is this unspoken force that is now coming after the survivors. Maybe they do talk about in season 1 and in season 2 how they all like swore an oath to never talk about what happened.
Right.
And maybe like Taisa's rise to being a state senator and the fact that Lottie is this incredibly wealthy cult leader, maybe the fact that they're digging into the events, and maybe it's the 25th anniversary of the crash, and they make a reference to the fact that like people Google them, which I think is really clever. Like I think that's like the idea that a lot of shows do this, or a lot of movies do this, where they kind of ignore real world implications of things.
Yes.
This show does a great job of being like, oh, you're that girl from that crash. And like even Adam was like, yeah, I found out who you were and I wanted to do some research on you, but that's it.
Yeah.
And but they were all over the fucking news. So of course there's going to be like, this was probably a huge national story. And in 1996. So It makes sense that like they are, people are talking about them on the 25th anniversary. In September of 2001, everybody talked about the 20-year anniversary of 9/11, and people talk about the 20th and the 25th anniversaries of things.
Yeah.
So maybe that's like stirring up it, and it is like coming after them because they're, violating a pact that they made in the woods.
Right. And I wonder if Van is connected to that pact, because we haven't seen Van yet, right?
And we know she's alive because we know who is cast as her as an adult.
Right, exactly. And so it is interesting. I mean, there's the 25th anniversary, and that could be the thing that triggers sort of everything starting to spiral and go downhill, or maybe there's some sort of external thing. And what was that term that you mentioned about wrestling last week, where you kind of predict the matches? Fantasy booking. Part of my fantasy booking, having this discussion with you right now, is what if like Van or somebody stayed behind to kind of keep this force at bay, this evil force that we're kind of thinking about or seeing, and for whatever reason they couldn't do it anymore, and that's why things are starting to happen, because they did have peace for those 25 years, and now things are starting.
That cabin, now, like my brain just started to spin as you were saying that, because what if, like, when they find that cabin, there's a corpse in a chair in the attic. What if there has to be somebody there to hold that evil at bay, right?
Yes.
And now with that person having been killed, whatever it was reached into the sky and pulled this fucking plane down.
Yep.
And, now I'm starting to get like the bad Lost vibes of like, oh no, what if it's one of them and now there's a time loop, and I'm like, no time loops, please.
Yeah. I don't think they're gonna get to time loops, but there's definite Lost vibes. Like in Lost, even that character of Jacob, who was that kind of character of like sitting there keeping the evil at bay.
Yeah.
One of the visions that you had of him right in the beginning was him sitting in a chair for a second like that. So that's very similar.
And now I'm starting to think like, what, who are the other characters, like those peripheral characters in 1996?
Right.
And my first thought goes to, and again, this is the very end of episode 2. Like, the coach, with the amputee with the one leg, amputee, Misty cut his fucking leg off. I gotta be honest, she does save him in that. His leg was squished. Yeah. But there's this event that we'll talk about at the end of episode 2 where he just kind of is like, I'm not taking any part in this, and he walks away.
Yeah. And hobbles away.
Yeah, and there's also, again, we brought this up last week, there's also that dark figure who was in Shauna's dream, talking to Jackie, like, you're gonna come with me now.
Yes.
So is that like the physical manifestation of it?
Right.
Is that like the guy in the chair, and does somebody need to stay behind? It's
So I mean, like, Sherry and I would talk about this a lot in the first season, but I think that either the showrunners or just fans have talked about the idea of a Wendigo. And the Wendigo is often kind of associated with like a Bigfoot kind of creature. It's like, sort of an urban legend monster kind of thing. But the main thing that you always take away from a Wendigo with like Native American lore is that it's this spirit that is always hungry. Like, it always wants to eat. And like the imagery of like the antlers on like the queen, and you see it a lot in the imagery for the marketing of the show, makes you think of a Wendigo creature. Yeah. And so like that might be this spirit that we're referring to.
That was also like in Pet Sematary. That was like theoretically, like they described it more in the book than they do in the movies, but that was like the spirit that lived in the burial ground that was right. Bringing people back, and the people that came back were, they were sour, and they, so I could definitely see that. And the imagery you brought up with that, when they bring back that deer, and the deer is like, it's shedding its antlers, which looks disgusting, even though it's like totally normal.
Right.
Like I was in Petco the other day, and like Athena has bearded dragons at work, and we're looking at like the lizards, and one lizard was shedding its skin, and it's gross. It's like, it looks like a head. It looks like an animal is coming out of another animal.
Ugh, that's pretty nasty.
Yeah. So the imagery is like gross, just like in the pet store, let alone in the woods when,
See what Danny brings to this discussion? He talks about 9/11 and Pet Sematary and bearded dragon shedding.
Yeah. So on that basis, on that, level, are we ready to talk about cannibalism?
Oh, almost. Okay. We're almost at the money shot. Oh, I actually did the motion. We're almost at the money shot for this.
All right, because I'm getting hungry.
Okay. All right. So we got to talk about Thaisa, and the transition for that is, I sometimes think that Thaisa is the one that's infected with the Wendigo, because she does all this weird stuff when she's asleep. She bites Van's lip in the beginning of episode 1 of this season. We see some stuff in here. We see the return of the kind of creature that she sees with the missing eyes. She's in the attic with Van, and she sleepwalks out to the edge of a cliff, and Van is able to save her and prevent her from going over that cliff. But she does see that creature with the eyes. And I think that one theme that we have with Thaisa, one very strong theme, is that you almost need like a loved one to keep the darkness at bay, like someone that knows you, that can keep you safe from yourself. And her wife in the present day filled that role and really does love her, but the wife doesn't know about what really happened in this plane crash. So I think that's why she's having such troubles with her wife. And just to kind of speed through Thaisa, in episode 2, we have yet another supernatural looking thing. I mean, this could just be a stylistic thing. It could just be like they're in her head. But we have this montage where she's exercising to kind of just deal with her insomnia and all of her issues.
Oh, yeah.
And she's in front of a mirror. And this is like a horror movie kind of trope where she's in like a mirror, in front of a mirror that has like 3 reflections, and the reflection moves, but she doesn't. And I was like, oh, okay, that seems pretty supernatural to me.
Yeah. I mean, Thaisa's entire character from the beginning seems like there is like a split personality.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, we see this in 1996. We see this now where she loses time. So where she doesn't know what's been going on, like at certain times.
Mm-hmm.
She has this thing now. She's having full on visions. Both like she was sleepwalking. Now she's having visions while she's awake. She had a vision that her son came home from school. Like her and the wife are separated, and the son came home to her house to play with the dog, and she called her wife and she said, "Look, don't panic, but our son's here. Come pick him up." And it turned out that was none of that happened. That their son was at school the whole time, and that when the wife comes, Thaisa's passed out, and everything she had seen with the son was in her mind. And then she like has this like where almost like Stephen King's The Dark Half, where like the dark half of her takes over while they're driving there, and she's like not even paying attention to the road. She's got this like crazed look on her face, and the episode ends with them getting into a pretty serious car accident. And I think her character has the most horror movie vibes to everything, and
Absolutely.
You don't know if it's like a split personality or a dormant evil twin or something is going on with her. And this is also the woman who secretly built a what do you call it in the crawl space, a shrine to the symbol. There's the doll with the eyes removed. There's the dog's head. I fear for that little dog that she bought.
Yeah. And I was worried about the son for a little bit when he was missing. When the wife came back, I was like, oh, is the son dead? Is the son going to be missing for a few episodes? And then we find out he was eaten or something, But luckily, he was just at school, and the actual imagining was him being there. So, yeah, Thaisa's modern day stuff seems to be the most interesting modern day stuff for me. And now that brings us to Shauna. And Shauna's modern day stuff is not as interesting, except for the fact that the detectives seem to like really be onto her. And it's not this kind of case of, oh, they got away with it. It's like, no, they're pretty much like fingered here. Ooh. But, but on these shows, a lot of times, even whether it's like Breaking Bad or this show, Breaking Bad and this show are so very different. But one thing about modern shows is a lot of times you have this sort of protagonist who is doing something bad or wrong, and they have loved ones that are just normal people, and the loved ones always seem annoying. Like this happens on like Homeland. A lot of the shows that me and Sherry love, the loved ones are kind of these annoying characters. And I'm talking about Shauna's daughter in this case. Like Shauna's daughter, there's always been kind of an annoying character on this show, but I kind of have a little bit more sympathy for her this season around. I
was going to say this. I actually liked her in this episode.
Yeah.
Because I'm putting myself into her shoes. If you found out that your mother is having an affair, but not even having an affair, like brazenly having an affair, like bringing the guy home into your house.
Right.
And bringing, and going to parties that you're at.
Right.
Like, that would be so freaking weird. And then on top of that, she basically knows that her mother's a killer at this point.
Right.
And she completely suspects that her mother and maybe her father, like, murdered this guy and covered it up. And now, so she's completely, like, I totally feel bad for her. And, I was a little weirded out by the scene in the bar.
Yeah.
Because, like, she's obviously not 21.
Right.
And so it's like they go from, like, a scene where she's, like, laying in bed with her boyfriend and, like, the boyfriend's basically naked. So you're like, okay, they just did it. Like, gross. And you're like, okay. She's like, I'm breaking up with you because she's done with all this shit. And then she's, like, chilling at this bar with her friend. And she just, like, basically decides to go flirt with this guy. And when we found out that he was an undercover cop, or a cop, not really undercover. I was so happy because I was like, this guy's really fucking creepy. And yeah, so I really hope they don't end up coming back to that like later on in the episode in the season where he's like, oh, I like the fact that you just graduated high school.
Oh, yeah, no.
With my porn stash.
Right. I mean, okay, so at that point when she's at the bar and she goes and hits on him, I was like, okay, where are we going with this? Like, what's going to happen here? But then the fact that it's connected to the guy who was Juliette Lewis's boyfriend, kind of in last season, like they kind of had sex a couple of times. Her friend from back in high school, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Kevin, right?
What's that?
The cop, Kevin.
Kevin, right, with a Y. That's right. But it's kind of cool because it gives them sort of an extra sort of foil in the present day. It gives them like a person to watch out for. I like all that stuff, but like as we keep saying, the real meat of the matter is Shauna in 1996. Hey, and so we have Jackie in the past. Now this is once again another trope that we see over and over and over again in TV shows where you have a character that's dead or maybe a character that's not around for some reason, but they're talking to the main character and they're reacting to everything that's going on in the main character's present day, giving them warnings and stuff, but they're usually taunting them, right? And I mean, I've seen this in many, many shows. And it works for Jackie, but it's so good in that first episode because she's lively, she's talking, and then you cut to like her frozen corpse just sitting there. It's very jarring at first. And Sherry's favorite part of episode 1 is when she knocks over Jackie. Jackie's ear comes off, and then Shauna holds up the ear, and that's the way the episode ends: is her popping the ear into her mouth. And what I was going to say was that for the show, I didn't really like episode 1 that much of this season because it really did feel like, okay, we're just making sure you're all up to speed before we can move on to the next part.
It's funny you said that because I posted that like I was super excited for season 1, for episode 1 because I had just binged season 1. I watched all 10 episodes of season 1 over last weekend, and then I watched episode 1 like Monday night. So like I watched the first 11 episodes of this show in like a 2.5 day span. So I really liked episode 1, but most of the people I know who watched the first season and then waited months and months for this episode were disappointed by it. Like I was talking to a friend of mine from work and she was like, yeah, I was a little disappointed. It was boring. I didn't really think they did anything to like progress. But I think those people like you who waited months and months, I think you got your fill in this episode here. I'll tell you another thing that you were talking about, like the scenes of Shauna talking to dead Jackie, and like the dead character kind of like mocking the
right.
It also reminded me of, and spoiler alert for a 24, 25-year-old movie, everybody, but it kind of reminded me of the last few scenes in Fight Club, where Brad Pitt is like actively mocking Edward Norton. Like, I don't know why you're talking to me. Like, you're the one having a crisis while you're yelling at your imaginary friend. Like, it's that like, I'm not real, so I can get away with saying anything and doing anything I want to you.
Right.
And I think I forgot her name, but the actress who plays Jackie is really good, and I'm glad that they kept. I kind of think like she's done now on the show.
Ella Purnell.
Yeah, she's really good, and I kind of feel like she's probably done with the show now, because now that, well, Jackie's not there anymore, I don't know, unless, maybe she's going to be with that man in black in Shauna's dreams.
Yeah, I think that they said that she's basically sorry, I'm looking up the name of the Radiohead song right now, but they said that she's like a guest character like the first 2 episodes of this season. So I think that's it for. Yeah. But
which makes sense.
Yeah. What I was gonna say though is that like she is awesome and I've loved her, and I hope they don't take that part out of the credits where she goes like this, because that's one of my favorite, But what I was gonna say is, you texted me, you sent me a message on Twitter saying like that was some episode of Yellowjackets, and then I said I was going to be haunted by it. And so basically, the way that it works is they find out that Sean has been talking to Jackie. They've put makeup on her face, or she's put makeup on her face. She's like braided her hair, and people are really creeped out by it. So they say, okay, we have to like give her a funeral pyre, and everyone seems to be on board. Lottie doesn't seem to be completely on board, but they put her on the pyre. She starts burning, and it really does feel like this is the end. Like I was like, oh, I thought she was going to get eaten.
The show does a great job of misdirecting the audience there, because I think every single person who watches this show is sitting there going, wait, they're not going to eat her?
Right. Exactly. And so this is the part where I was saying that it felt like, okay, there is an actual supernatural presence on this show. Yeah. Because they do a thing which, ironically, we're talking about Evil Dead so much. It's like Evil Dead, where they show like the perspective of something going through the woods, just like, you know, the Deadites going through the woods in Evil Dead. And it goes like through the trees, and it goes up in the air, and it comes down, and it hits this collection of snow on a tree branch, which falls onto Jackie. And I was saying, because when that happens, it's during this montage where Travis and Nat are having sex, but then he's also seeing Lottie. And so it's like, okay, maybe you could say that like the perspective is like part of Travis's weird vision, but I doubt it. I think it really is like, here's the evil presence, and the evil presence is literally knocking over the snow so that it can turn Jackie into a freaking slow grilled,
there's this. So this, you would think that like the snow is just going to put the fire out,
right?
It doesn't. And they make they like linger on how like the embers are still burning. So instead, she's like slow roasted overnight.
Yeah.
And they come out in the morning to like, I love this fucking scene where they wake up. Wait. So I think I've mentioned this to you. I live on the 6th floor of an apartment building, but my windows face the avenue, and there's a Popeye's fucking chicken right outside on the avenue.
Yeah.
And if my windows are open, there are days where I'm laying in bed and I'm just like, oh, Popeyes.
Yes.
And the wafting odor of Popeyes fills my living room and my bedroom.
Yes.
And these girls wake up to like the smell of home cooking.
Yes. And what then happens is probably one of my favorite things I've seen on this show. As Danny recovers his camera, one of my favorite things I've ever seen on this show. Just such a well done moment. Just super thought out. So great. You have this like kind of going back and forth where there's this imagery of all of them sitting around a table, and they look sort of like they're like ancient Greeks basically, and they're going to participate in a bacchanal. And you go from them sitting around a table, kind of all looking at each other like, should we do it? Should we do it? To all of them standing around Jackie's corpse and looking down at it. And then, you know, I think Shauna is the first one to take a bite. And then Misty looks like she takes a bite pretty quickly. And then they're feasting at the bacchanal while they're feasting on Jackie. And it's super quick cut, so you don't see this sort of gratuitous, like they're not like biting their flesh and going like this or anything like that. But it's done so well that it's like fucking terrifying. And you mentioned the coach before. The coach, he's like there, he's a little hungry, but he's like, no, we can't do this. And he goes back into the cabin, and there's this fucking perfect shot where he's like up against the wall in the cabin, and the door's still open, and you can see them all hunched over like fucking ghouls on Jackie. And it's playing this Radiohead song too, which whenever they fucking play Radiohead in a show, it's like, okay, this is gonna be an amazing moment. And it's this song Climbing Up the Walls, and it's just so well done.
Yeah. And the music in general in this show is freaking great. Like, especially with like the 96 elements, because they're playing time appropriate music, and it's like the music that we kind of came of age to.
Yes.
Like we were just getting to high school in 96. So it's like all that like awesome alternative rock that's playing. This was such a great final few minutes of this episode, and it, I brought up that Huffington Post article, like, where's the cannibalism? Well, here you go. And this is going to be a turning point in the show, because it's almost now referring to human beings animalistically, but like once you get a taste for flesh, you're, especially, it's not like they have a food supply out there. They've made it abundantly clear that the two hunters keep coming back empty-handed. And, we know from the very first scene of the very first episode that, somebody ends up, face planting onto some spikes and ending up as dinner.
Yep.
So, there's a bunch of characters, peripheral characters there that we don't know their names. And chances are not many of them are going to come back. But also with the whole idea of like Lottie surviving and Van, we know, is going to be back, it also does lead you to think maybe there are some other characters that make it back that we just haven't seen yet, which is also really interesting, that they've like managed to kind of show but not show everything yet.
Right.
Like the temptation to do like an episode per character is something that like a lot of other shows would do. Like here's 55 minutes on Van. Here's 50, but they don't do that. They do focus on some characters. They do give you some backstory, but then they take them back to the ensemble, and it's really a show about the ensemble.
Yep.
And so I'm really interested. And like obviously we mentioned Javi. We don't know what his deal is. Lottie thinks he's alive, so who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe he's working for it. We don't know.
I feel like Javi's one of the good side people. Like I think if we're gonna draw a line, I think that like, Nat and Javi and maybe even potentially Lottie are on the good side. I'm leaning towards Lottie might be good now. And then Thaisa and Shauna might be on the bad side, or Shauna's kind of like in the middle. I think Travis was on the good side, but he kind of gets pulled into the darkness. Who knows? But what I want to say to you guys as we wrap this up, because we're almost at that hour mark, is we really, really love when you guys give us comments. I know you guys give a lot of comments on Danny's short videos that he makes and stuff, but let's get this Yellowjackets discussion going. Let us know what you thought about these first 2 episodes of season 2. Because part of what I really loved about Yellowjackets season 1 was I got to ghost book or whatever the fuck Daddy said.
Fantasy book.
There we go. I got to do that every week with you guys. So make sure you're doing it this time around. Danny, did you want to talk about what we got on the channel besides Yellowjackets?
Yeah, real quick. We're counting down to Evil Dead Rise. We covered 2013's Evil Dead. We covered Drag Me to Hell by Sam Raimi. We're about to talk about Darkman. So check out, stay tuned to the channel for our review of Darkman. And I've been releasing some shorts. I did a short on Shudder's Halfway to Halloween, what they have coming in April. I have a couple other really short horror reviews out there. I talked about Death Proof because it was Quentin Tarantino's birthday the other day. So yeah, we have a bunch of stuff. If you're excited for Evil Dead Rise, then this is a good channel for you.
Boom. Good. Well put, man. So anyway, it was really fun talking about these first 2 episodes with you. Guys, we will be back here Saturdays, pretty much as early as we can get on here for you to watch. And so every Saturday we will have Yellowjackets reviews for the rest of the season. Make sure you guys are subscribed, and we will see you guys next